Al and Joe decided to try bungee jumping one day. "Hey, Joe," Al said, "I've got a brilliant idea. We could make a fortune running our own bungee jumping business in Mexico. They don't have it there." Joe agreed, and the two pooled their money to buy all the equipment. A tower, an elastic cord, insurance, the works. They headed to Mexico and set up their operation in the town square. As they worked on constructing the tower, a curious crowd began to gather, growing larger by the minute. When the tower was complete, Al turned to Joe and said, "Let's give them a demo to drum up business." Al strapped himself in and jumped. He bounced at the end of the cord, but when he shot back up, Joe noticed he had a few cuts and scratches on him. Joe tried to grab him but missed, and Al fell again. When he bounced back up this time, he was bruised and bleeding. Still unable to catch him, Joe watched as Al fell a third time. When he came back up, Al had broken bones, torn clothes, and looked barely conscious. Finally, Joe managed to grab him and pull him back onto the platform. "What happened?" Joe asked, panicked. "Was the cord too long?" Al, gasping for breath, managed to whisper, "The cord was fine. It was the crowd. What the hell is a piñata?" A guy was going on a movie date with a beautiful girl. Before he left, he made the mistake of eating a jumbo can of beans. As soon as he picked her up, he felt the pressure building, but he thought he could hold it in until they got to the theater. When they arrived, he offered her some popcorn and a Coke. She agreed, so he excused himself to the restroom first. But the line was long, so he decided to grab the snacks and join her in the theater instead. After the movie, he tried again. But the restroom line was still painfully long. He figured he could hold it until he dropped her off, so he held on and drove her home. When they pulled into her driveway, she excitedly announced, "My grandparents are here. Come in and meet them." Despite his growing discomfort, he agreed and went inside. They sat down at the dinner table with her family, and he thought he couldn't wait much longer. So he discreetly aimed a silent, toxic release toward the family dog, Duke, hoping they'd blame the poor pooch. Her father immediately stood up, shouted, "Duke!" and sat back down. Relieved, he let a few more out, each one a little louder and stronger. Her father stood up again, called Duke, and sat back down. Finally, he couldn't hold it anymore and let out a thunderous, hair-raising fart that echoed through the dining room. Her father jumped up one last time and shouted, "Duke, get the hell out from under him before he craps on you!" Two young boys walked into a pharmacy one day, picked up a box of tampons, and headed to the checkout counter. The pharmacist asked the older boy, "Son, how old are you?" "8," the boy replied. The pharmacist raised an eyebrow and asked, "Do you know what these are used for?" The boy replied, "Not exactly, but they're not for me. They're for him. He's my little brother. He's 4. "Oh, really?" the pharmacist said with a grin. "Yes," the boy continued. "We saw on TV that if you use these, you can swim, play tennis, and ride a bike. Right now, he can't do any of those." 3 technicians went for an interview at the local telephone company. All 3 were highly qualified, so the boss decided to test them. He brought them into his office and said, "You 3 look great on paper, but I need to see what you're really made of. Here's the deal. I'm going to give you 1 day to impress me. Set as many telephone poles as you can and report back tomorrow." The 3 technicians got to work setting poles and returned the next day to report their results. The boss asked the first guy, "How many did you set?" 13, he replied. "Wow, 13? That's impressive," the boss said, clearly impressed. He turned to the second guy. "What about you?" 9, the second technician answered. "Well, not as many as the first guy, but still impressive," the boss said. Then the boss turned to the third guy. "And you? How many did you set?" The third guy grinned proudly. 2. 2? That's it? What were you doing all day?" the boss asked, shocked. The third guy's blonde hair blew in the wind as he replied, "Well, I didn't want to be a snitch, but those 2 guys, they only put theirs halfway in the ground." A couple went to breakfast at a restaurant where the seniors' special was 2 eggs, bacon, hash browns, and toast for $2.99. "Sounds good," the wife said, "but I don't want the eggs." The waiter responded, "Then I'll have to charge you $3.49 since you're ordering a la carte." "You mean I have to pay for not taking the eggs?" the wife asked incredulously. "Yes," the waiter confirmed. All right, I'll take the special then, the wife said. Great, how would you like your eggs? The waiter asked. Raw and in the shell, she replied. She took the 2 eggs home and baked a cake. Don't mess with seniors. We've been around the block more than once. A nurse asks a patient to remove his clothes and put on a gown before his examination. In front of you? The patient asks shyly. The nurse reassures him, Don't worry, I've seen plenty of naked bodies before. The patient replies, Not one like mine. You'd die laughing at my naked body. Of course I won't laugh, the nurse replies. I'm a professional. In over 20 years, I've never laughed at a patient. Okay then, the patient says, slowly undressing. He unbuttons his shirt, takes off his pants, and with a sigh, pulls down his underwear. Standing before the nurse is a large male body with the smallest male organ she's ever seen, almost the size of a battery in both length and width. Despite herself, the nurse tries to hold back a giggle, but it slips out. Realizing she's laughing, she feels embarrassed, quickly composes herself. I'm so sorry, the nurse says. I don't know what came over me. On my honor as a nurse, I promise it won't happen again. Now tell me, what seems to be the problem? The patient replies, It's swollen. The nurse runs out of the room. The boss was puzzled when one of his most valued employees didn't show up for work and didn't call in. Needing to resolve an urgent issue, he dialed the employee's home number and was greeted by a child's whispered, Hello. Is your daddy home? The boss asked. Yes, whispered the child. May I speak with him? No. Surprised, the boss tried again. Is your mommy there? Yes. Can I speak with her? No. Growing more curious and hoping to leave a message, the boss asked, Is anyone else there? Yes, whispered the child. A policeman. Wondering what a cop was doing at his employee's home, the boss asked, May I talk to the policeman? No, he's busy, came the reply. Busy doing what? Talking to mommy and daddy and the fireman, the child answered. Now even more concerned as he heard a loud noise in the background, the boss asked, What's that noise? A helicopter, the child whispered. What's going on there? The boss demanded, truly worried. Again, the child whispered. The search team just landed. Confused and alarmed, the boss asked, What are they searching for? Still whispering, the child giggled and said, Me. 2 avid fishermen decide to go on a fishing trip. They rent all the gear, rods, reels, wading suits, a rowboat, a car, and even a cabin in the woods. They spend a small fortune. The first day they go fishing, but they don't catch a thing. The same happens on the second day and the third. This continues for the entire trip. Finally, on the last day, one of the men manages to catch a fish. As they're driving home, both are feeling down. One turns to the other and says, Can you believe it? This one lousy fish cost us $1,500. The other guy thinks for a moment and replies, Well, it's a good thing we didn't catch any more. An elderly couple, Margaret and Bert, moved to Texas. Bert had always wanted a pair of authentic cowboy boots, so when he saw some on sale, he bought them and proudly wore them home. He walked into the kitchen and asked, Notice anything different about me? Margaret looked him over and said, Nope. Frustrated, Bert stormed off to the bathroom, undressed, and returned to the kitchen completely naked, except for the boots. He asked again, this time louder, Notice anything different now? Margaret glanced up and said, Bert, what's different? It was hanging down yesterday, it's hanging down today, and it'll be hanging down tomorrow. Furious, Bert shouted, And do you know why it's hanging down, Margaret? Nope, she replied. It's hanging down because it's looking at my new boots. Margaret, without missing a beat, replied, Should have bought a hat, Bert. Should have bought a hat. A husband and wife were celebrating their 50th anniversary, and their 3 successful children all agreed to join them for a special Sunday dinner. Happy anniversary, Mom and Dad, gushed their oldest son, a surgeon. Sorry I'm running late. I had an emergency at the hospital and didn't have time to get you a gift. Don't worry, the father replied. The important thing is that we're all together today. Their second son, a lawyer, arrived next and said, You and Mom look great, Dad. I just flew in from Los Angeles between depositions, so I didn't have time to shop for a gift. It's nothing, the father said. We're just glad you could make it. Finally, their daughter, a marketing executive, walked in. Hello and happy anniversary. I'm sorry, but my boss is sending me out of town, and I was really busy packing, so I didn't have time to get you anything. After dessert, the father cleared his throat and said, "There's something your mother and I have wanted to tell you for a long time. You see, we were very poor, but despite that, we managed to send each of you to college. Throughout the years, we knew we loved each other deeply, but we just never found the time to get married." The three children gasped in disbelief, exclaiming, "You mean we're bastards?" "Yep," the father grinned. "And cheap ones, too." Midlife is when you go to the doctor and realize you're so old, you now have to pay someone to look at you naked. The good news about midlife is that the glass is still half full, but the bad news is it won't be long before your teeth are floating in it. Midlife women no longer have upper arms. We have wingspans. We're no longer women in sleeveless shirts. We're flying squirrels in drag. Midlife hits when you stand naked in front of a mirror and realize you can see your rear end without even turning around. Midlife brings the wisdom that life throws you curves, and now you're sitting on your biggest ones. Midlife is when you want to grab every firm young thing in a tube top and scream, "Listen, honey, even the Roman Empire fell, and those things will too." Midlife is when you start to repeat yourself, and your chins follow suit. You become more reflective in midlife. You start pondering the big questions. What is life? Why am I here? And how much healthy choice ice cream can I eat before it's no longer a healthy choice? A couple was in a busy shopping center just before Christmas. The wife suddenly realized her husband was missing, and since they had a lot to do, she called him on his mobile. "Where are you? You know we have lots to do," she said. He replied, "Do you remember the jeweler's shop we went into about 10 years ago where you fell in love with that diamond necklace? I couldn't afford it at the time, but I promised that one day I'd get it for you." Tears welled up in her eyes, and she choked up. "Yes, I remember that shop," she said. "Well," he said, "I'm in the gun shop next door to it." Three men were visiting a nudist beach. Two of them were clearly enjoying themselves, while the third looked a bit glum. Their conversation turned to their jobs. "I work on Wall Street," said the first man with a smile. "It's well paid, but I have to wear a suit and tie every day. This is a perfect vacation. No restrictions, just freedom." The second man added, "I'm a deep-sea diver. I'm usually weighed down with a suit, boots, and a brass helmet. This is pure freedom for me." They turned to the third man, who was still looking down, and asked what he did for a living. "I'm a pickpocket," the man said, "and my therapist suggested I take a vacation where I won't be tempted to steal anything." After a long night of drinking, two guys left the bar and got in the car. A few minutes later, an old man appeared at the passenger window and lightly tapped on it. The passenger screamed, "Look, there's a ghost's face at the window!" The driver sped up, but the old man's face stayed there. Terrified, the passenger rolled down the window and asked shakily, "What do you want?" The old man calmly asked, "You got any tobacco?" The passenger handed him a cigarette, then yelled to the driver, "Step on it," and quickly rolled up the window. A few minutes later, they were laughing about it, but suddenly the tapping returned. "There he is again," the passenger yelled, rolling down the window. "What now?" The old man asked softly, "Do you have a light?" The passenger, even more scared, threw out a lighter and screamed, "Step on it!" Now going 100 miles per hour, they thought they were safe, but then the tapping came again. "Oh my God, he's back!" the passenger shouted, rolling down the window in terror. "What now?" the old man gently replied. "You want some help getting out of the mud?" A blind man went to the hospital for an eye operation. After the procedure was completed, the doctor checked on him and asked, "Can you see now?" The man shook his head and said, "No, Doc, I still can't see anything." The doctor, trying to figure out the issue, jokingly said, "Let's try something unusual." He called the nurse over and asked her to remove her clothes. "Can you see anything now?" The man paused for a moment and replied, "No, still nothing." The doctor chuckled and raised an eyebrow. "You cheater! If you can't see, why is your package waking up?" A hooded robber stormed into a Fargo bank, demanding that the tellers fill a sack with cash. As he was about to leave, a brave customer seized the opportunity, yanked off the robber's hood, and exposed his face. Without hesitation, the robber shot the customer. He then scanned the bank and noticed a teller who was staring directly at him. He immediately shot the teller as well. The terrified customers, now all too afraid to make a sound, stared nervously at the floor. The robber, eyeing the silence, shouted, "Well, did anyone else see my face?" After a few moments of tense silence, an elderly Norwegian man named Ole, sitting quietly in the back, timidly raised his hand and said, "My wife got a pretty good look at you." A woman walks into the downtown welfare office, followed by 15 kids. "Wow," the social worker exclaims. "Are they all yours?" "Yep, they're all mine," the mom replies with a sigh, having heard that question 1,000 times. She says, "Sit down, Leroy," and all the children rush to find seats. The social worker, trying to keep up, says, "Well, you must be here to sign up. I'll need all your children's names." "To keep it simple," the mom says, "the boys are all named Leroy, and the girls are all named Leroy." In disbelief, the social worker asks, "Wait, are you serious? They're all named Leroy." "Yep," the mom replies. "It makes it easier. When it's time to get them out of bed for school, I just yell, 'Leroy,' and they all come running. When it's time for dinner, I just yell, 'Leroy,' and they all come. And if I need to stop one from running into the street, I just yell, 'Leroy,' and they all stop. It's the smartest idea I ever had, naming them all Leroy." The social worker thinks for a moment, then wrinkles her forehead and asks, "But what if you just want one kid to come and not the whole bunch?" "Then I call them by their last names." I'd like to share a personal story with my closest friends about drinking and driving. As you know, we've all had our close calls with the authorities after a night out with drinks. A few nights ago, I was out with friends enjoying a few cocktails and some nice red wine. Knowing that I might have been slightly over the limit, I decided to do something I've never done before. I took a cab home. Sure enough, I passed a police checkpoint. But since it was a cab, they waved me right through. I made it home safely without any issues, which was a big surprise. The thing is, I've never driven a cab before, and I have no idea where I got it or what to do with it now that it's parked in my garage. A woman confides in her priest, "Father, I have a problem. My 2 female parrots keep saying, 'Hi, cutie, want to have some fun?'" The priest reassures her, "Don't worry. I have 2 male parrots who only pray and read the Bible. Let's put them in the same cage. Your parrots will stop saying that awful phrase." The next day, the woman brings her parrots to the priest's home. The male parrots are in their cage holding rosary beads and praying. When the woman places her female parrots in the cage, they immediately shout, "Hi, cutie, want to have some fun?" One of the male parrots turns to the other and says, "Put the beads away, Frank. Our prayers have been answered." 2 Polish hunters hired a pilot to fly them into the Minnesota wilderness, where they successfully bagged 2 large bull moose. As they were loading up the plane to head back, the pilot informed them that the plane could only carry the hunters, their gear, and 1 moose. The hunters protested, saying, "Last year we shot 2 moose, and the pilot had the exact same plane as yours. He let us take both." Reluctantly, the pilot gave in, not wanting to be shown up by another bush pilot, and allowed both moose to be loaded onto the plane. However, despite the pilot's best efforts, the overloaded plane couldn't handle the weight and crashed in the wilderness. After the crash, Stash and Stan were miraculously alive. Climbing out of the wreckage, Stash asked, "Any idea where we are?" Stan looked around and said, "I think we're pretty close to where we crashed last year." A drunken man stumbles into a biker bar, orders a drink, and looks around. He notices 3 men sitting at a corner table. He gets up, staggers over, and leans in close to the biggest, meanest biker at the table. He says, "I went by your grandma's house today and saw her in the hallway, buck naked. Man, she is one fine-looking woman." The biker doesn't say a word. His buddies glance at each other confused because this biker is known for being tough and quick to fight. The drunk leans in again and says, "I got it on with your grandma. She's the best I've ever had." The biker still doesn't react, but his friends are starting to get really angry. The drunk leans closer for one final remark and says, "I'll tell you something else, boy. Your grandma liked it." At this, the biker stands up, grabs the drunk by the shoulders, looks him square in the eyes, and says, "Grandpa, go home. You're drunk." The husband had just finished reading a book called "You Can Be the Man of Your House." With new confidence, he stormed into the kitchen and declared, From now on, I'm the man of this house, and my word is law. Tonight, you'll prepare me a gourmet meal, and when I'm finished eating, you'll serve me a delicious dessert." He continued, "After dinner, we'll go upstairs, and we'll have the kind of sex I want. Then you'll draw me a bath, wash my back, towel me dry, and bring me my robe. After that, you'll massage my feet and hands." The wife looked at him and calmly replied, "Well, tomorrow I'd say the funeral director will be the one dressing and combing your hair." A woman was enjoying a shopping spree in town. She found the perfect pair of shoes in the first store, then a beautiful dress on sale in the second, and in the third store, everything had just been reduced by 50%. Her day was going wonderfully when her mobile phone rang. It was her doctor informing her that her husband had been in a terrible car accident and was in critical condition in the ICU. The woman calmly told the doctor to let her husband know where she was and that she'd be there as soon as possible. But as she hung up, she realized she was leaving what had turned into the best shopping trip ever. She decided to sneak in a few more stores before heading to the hospital. She ended up shopping the rest of the morning, even treating herself to a cup of coffee and a chocolate cake slice from the last store. Feeling jubilant, she suddenly remembered her husband. Feeling guilty, she rushed to the hospital and found the doctor in the hallway. "How is he?" she asked anxiously. The doctor glared at her and shouted, "You went ahead and finished your shopping trip, didn't you? While you've been out for hours, your husband has been languishing in the ICU. It's just as well you finished because he'll need round-the-clock care for the rest of his life, and it looks like you'll be his full-time caregiver." The woman was overwhelmed with guilt, breaking down in tears. The doctor paused, then chuckled and said, "I'm just pulling your leg. He's dead. Now show me what you bought." On a transatlantic flight, a plane encounters a severe storm. The turbulence is intense, and things get even worse when one wing is struck by lightning. One woman in particular loses control. Screaming, she stands at the front of the plane. "I'm too young to die," she wails. Then she shouts, "Well, if I'm going to die, I want my last moments on Earth to be memorable. No one has ever made me feel truly like a woman. That's it. Is there anyone on this plane who can make me feel like a woman?" For a moment, there is complete silence. Everyone forgets their own fear and stares at the desperate woman. Then a man stands up at the rear of the plane. "I can make you feel like a woman," he says. He's striking, tall, well-built, with flowing black hair and piercing, dark eyes. He slowly walks up the aisle, unbuttoning his shirt with each step. No one moves. The woman breathes heavily in anticipation, her eyes locked on him as he approaches. He removes his shirt, revealing a muscular chest. He extends the shirt to her and whispers, "Iron this." Mrs. Jones was still cleaning the house when her husband returned from work. She was dressed in old, worn-out clothes, her hair was messy, there was dust on her face, and she looked exhausted. Her husband looked at her and said, "Is this what I come home to after a hard day's work?" Mrs. Jones's neighbor, Mrs. Smith, overheard the comment and quickly excused herself. She rushed back home, washed up, brushed and styled her hair, put on her best dress and prettiest stockings, applied makeup, and waited for her husband to return. When he finally arrived, hot and tired, he walked into the house, saw his wife, stopped in his tracks, and then angrily shouted, "And where do you think you're going tonight?" One day, Mrs. Jones went shopping. When her husband came home in the evening, she started telling him about a beautiful cotton dress she had seen earlier. "I saw it in a shop this morning," she said, and you want to buy it?" her husband interrupted. "How much is it?" £40. £40 for a cotton dress? That's far too much." But every evening when Mr. Jones came home from work, his wife continued to talk about the dress. After a week of this, he finally said, "All right, buy the dress. Here's the money." Mrs. Jones was thrilled. The next evening, when Mr. Jones came home and asked, "Did you get the famous dress?" she replied, "No." "Why not?" he asked, surprised. "Well," she said, "it was still sitting in the window of the shop after a week, so I thought, if nobody else wants it, then I don't want it either." After 15 years of marriage, a husband and wife went to counseling. The wife unleashed a passionate tirade about neglect, loneliness, and feeling unloved, going on with a list of grievances. Finally, the therapist stood up, walked around the desk, and asked the wife to stand. He then hugged her and kissed her passionately. The wife, stunned, sat down in silence. The therapist turned to the husband and said, "This is what your wife needs at least 3 times a week. Can you manage that?" The husband thought for a moment and said, "Well, I can drop her off on Mondays and Wednesdays, but Fridays are for fishing." A young man from the city went to visit his farmer uncle. For a few days, the uncle showed him the usual sights: chickens, cows, crops. But soon the nephew grew bored, and the uncle ran out of ideas. Finally, the uncle suggested, "Why don't you grab a gun, take the dogs, and go hunting?" The nephew lit up and eagerly headed out with the dogs in tow. A few hours later, he returned, beaming. "How was it?" asked the uncle. "Great," said the nephew. "Got any more dogs?" A school teacher injured his back and had to wear a hidden plaster cast around his upper body under his shirt. On the first day of term, he was assigned to the toughest class in school. Walking into the rowdy room, he confidently opened the window wide, letting in a strong breeze. When his tie started flapping, he calmly grabbed a stapler and stapled it to his chest. The class was silent, and discipline was never an issue again. A guy is driving through the countryside when he spots a sign in front of a rundown house, "Talking dog for sale." Curious, he rings the bell and the owner tells him the dog is in the backyard. The guy heads out back and finds a friendly-looking retriever. "You talk?" he asks. "Yep," the dog replies. Stunned, the guy says, "Wow, what's your story?" The dog sighs. "Well, I discovered I could talk as a pup and told the CIA. They made me a top spy, flying me all over the world. I sat in meetings with world leaders, eavesdropping on secrets no one suspected a dog would hear. After years of that, I retired to work security at an airport, sniffing out shady characters. I won medals, settled down, had some pups, and now I'm retired." The guy is blown away. He goes back inside and asks the owner, "How much for the dog?" $10, the owner says. $10? This dog is incredible. Why so cheap? Because he's a liar. He never did any of that stuff. A farmhand is driving around the farm checking fences when he radios his boss. "Boss, I got a problem. I hit a pig on the road and it's stuck in the bull bars of my truck. It's still wriggling. What should I do?" The boss replies, "There's a shotgun in the back of your truck. Shoot the pig in the head, and when it stops wriggling, pull it out and toss it in a bush." "Got it," the farmhand says and signs off. 10 minutes later, he radios back. "Boss, I did what you said. I shot the pig, dragged it out, and threw it in a bush." "So what's the problem now?" snaps the boss. "Well, the blue light on his motorcycle is still flashing." Fresh out of business school, the young man answered a want ad for an accountant. Now he was being interviewed by a very nervous man who ran a small business that he had started himself. "I need someone with an accounting degree," the man said, "but mainly I'm looking for someone to do my worrying for me." "Excuse me?" the accountant said. "I worry about a lot of things," the man said, "but I don't want to have to worry about money. Your job will be to take all the money worries off my back." "I see," the accountant said. "And how much does the job pay?" "I'll start you at $80,000. $80,000, the accountant exclaimed. "How can such a small business afford a sum like that?" "That," the owner said, "is your first worry." A retired Army general moves into a new apartment. On weekends, his neighbors notice a peculiar habit. At 2 a.m., he'd stumble home drunk, slam his left boot on the floor, then slam the right one even harder before collapsing into bed. The thunderous noise woke everyone in the building, including their kids. One morning, the neighbors decided to address the issue. "Good morning, General. First, thank you for your service and welcome to the complex." "Thank you," the general replied. "Sir, we want you to enjoy your retirement, but could you please stop slamming your boots down late at night? It's waking all of us up." "Oh, I didn't realize. I'm so sorry. It won't happen again." "Thank you, sir." The next weekend, the general came home drunk as usual. He slammed his left boot on the floor, then paused. "Wait, This is what they were talking about, he muttered. With great care, he gently set his right boot down and went to bed. An hour later, his doorbell rang incessantly, accompanied by loud knocking. Groggily, the general opened the door to find his sleep-deprived neighbors in their pajamas. "General, for the love of God, just slam the other boot so we can get some sleep."